Okay, so if you happen to have a Crosley all-in-one turntable and you've later discovered that, it's a piece of crap as a turntable, I wanted to show you what I did to mine to kind of make it something that's a little bit more useful. To be honest, the turntable is absolute crap. It's the same one you'll see in countless other cheap Chinese turntables, so don't use that at all. Stop using it. But it does have a CD player and a tape deck and also speakers, so I thought, I don't want to get rid of it. It's got a little bit of use, and actually my amp ended up dying, so I needed something to listen to my good turntable through, and I just put it through the auxiliary port in the back. And while I was using it, I noticed that actually it didn't sound that bad, and the biggest problem was that it had the cheap Crosley Chinese electronics that just really didn't sound very good. That's my cat in the background, if you're wondering. She's making weird noises. Anyway, so I got to thinking, I wonder if you just put in a different amp inside of the cabinet, if it would end up sounding better. And what I did was I went online and I picked up one of those $20 Lepai amps. Some people love them, some people hate them, but they're pretty much just cheap little tri-path-based amplifiers that actually do a pretty good job of basic driving of speakers. And I figured, well, it's not a great amp, but it might be better than what's inside of the Crosley. And what I ended up doing was I just cut the speaker wires to the Crosley and ran the speakers to the Lepai. And honestly, I was really impressed. It sounded a lot better than the Crosley stock amp. I mean, it's still certainly not audiophile quality by any stretch of the imagination, but it's definitely a lot better, and it makes it a lot more listenable than the Crosley plastic knobs and everything that would make terrible noises, and it just didn't drive the speakers very much. I'm assuming that it's actually intentionally a little underpowered, just because with the built-in turntable, if it was too loud, it was going to make it skip even more than it would because it's, a Crosley without any kind of counterweight or anti-skate, and the tone arm's too long, the tone arm's too short. But regardless, getting to what I'm saying is, once I just did that basic test of cutting the wires, I realized that it sounded great, and I wanted to find a way to mount it inside the cabinet. And I also was thinking maybe I could keep the CD player and tape deck functions and radio, just because, I mean, why not? It's an extra thing. As I started taking the cabinet apart to find a place to mount it, I discovered that most of the 10-year-old cheap Chinese CD player and stereo components, they were actually mostly held together with glue and electrical tape in spots, and I just figured, why go through the effort of running an extra line out into the Lepai amp when it might end up breaking in a week anyway. Another thing I recommend is to ditch the stock power supply that Parts Express includes with the Lepai. This one is a 3 amp power supply. The Lepai says it uses a 2, but most people have found that between like 4 and 5 amps seems to work really well. So I just went and got a cheap, another cheap Chinese power supply that was 5 amps. And it solved some of the problems. For one, this was too short for how long I needed. It's a pretty short little cable. And the other one's got the box that plugs in and it adds length to it. And also, it doesn't seem to make a whinny. It kind of made like a whining, whinny noise whenever that one was plugged in. So swapping that out made a significant difference. Now, obviously, I wouldn't recommend just going out and buying a Crosley to do this. If you find one at a thrift store, or you have one already sitting around and you want to make it into something better that maybe you can use in a bedroom or somewhere else, I recommend trying this mod out. And also, you can use the parts that are here to mount it. I actually have this one here is mounted using parts from the CD player, the plastic parts. Another thing I did was, because I wanted to keep the Crosley faceplate to kind of not just have a gaping hole in the front of the machine, I took an old 45, it's actually a 45 of Somebody's Watching Me by Rockwell that was all scratched up, and I cut it in half to cover where the holes for the knobs were. I also had to I couldn't find a good way to cut the plastic, so I ended up just taking pliers and breaking pieces off until I had enough space for all of the knobs and everything. I'm sure if you're a little bit more handy than I am, you could do a better job than this, but this is how I have it. So now I'm going to go ahead and play you samples. So first thing you're going to do is you're going to hear just the Crosley stock, and then you're going to hear the Lepai, which was hooked up but just kind of setting at the top. And then the last thing you're going to hear is the final setup. It's got the 5-volt power supply, everything's mounted in there, all the electronics are removed, other than the tape deck. I left the tape deck in there. It just seemed like, why have another hole in the machine that I have to cover up? And speaking of holes, because of the fact that it had that aux in, it actually gave me a perfect hole in the back to just run all the cables out of to make everything look nice and clean and not have to drill any extra holes into the cabinet. So anyway, let's go ahead and let's listen to the sound, and then you can decide if this is something you want to try. Again, you can do it for 20 bucks if you want to make your Crosley sound better. Maybe you can use it if you're buying a new turntable and you've got this Crosley and you don't want to, or you don't really have the money to buy an amp and speakers. This could be a nice little temporary solution. The one thing I'll recommend is, even though this seems like a great surface to put your turntable on, do not do it. The amount of vibrations that come through this top when this thing is, you know, even turned up a little bit is really high, and it's going to make for a pretty bad listening experience. So there you have it. Those are the samples. So you can decide if this is something you want to do yourself. I will say that these were all recorded with the microphone on my camcorder, so there might have been, you know, it's not a perfect representation of what it sounds like in this room, but for me, I think it sounds pretty good. Whenever I do get a better setup, I can move this upstairs or something, put it in a bedroom, maybe use it in the basement. You know, there's a whole bunch of places where I could use a nice little cabinet that plays audio. So I think it's worth the $20, $30 for the Lepai and a new power supply and a little bit of work to get it in there. At the same time, I still wouldn't recommend buying a Crosley just to do this. If you have one, cool. If you find one cheap, by all means, go for it. But really, you're gonna get probably better results if you even just bought a Lepai and a couple of bookshelf speakers. But this is something to maybe help keep all of these unwanted Crosleys useful, instead of, you know, in a landfill somewhere, or God forbid being actually used to listen to records with the shitty plastic turntable that it has in it. So hopefully you enjoyed this, and hopefully it works out for you. Thanks.